Today we are going to talk about informational texts. Specifically, we're going to look at the elements of an informational text and how we can use them to boost our comprehension of what we are reading. First, we need to look at what we're talking about when we talk about informational text. Informational text is nonfiction writing about the real world, including real places, real people, real things, and or real events that have actually happened. Another name for informational text or informational writing that you will see is expository writing, where people are basically introducing information to people. Some examples of the types of genres that we find in informational text are biographies, where we're reading about somebody else's life, a real person's life, textbooks, like what you might use in your science or social study classes, interviews with real people, the news is a source of informational text, etc., etc. And we have read one informational text already. We read Guts, or a part of Guts actually, which was a kind of like an autobiography about how Gary Paulson, the author of Hatchet, used his real life experiences to help shape his writing. So we have some experience in this class with informational text. We are going to be getting even more experience over the next few weeks. Some of the text features that we see in informational text that we don't typically see in like narrative stories are the use of titles and subtitles, which help us understand what we're reading about in a certain section of the text. Sometimes authors will use bold words to help set off important words that they want us to understand or to learn. And often in informational texts, we'll find diagrams, illustrations, pictures, graphs, etc., that all give us additional information that we can use to improve our comprehension of what we're reading. So when you're reading an informational text, pay attention to the text features because they are actually giving you more information that you can use to understand what you're reading. And all of those things that I've just mentioned, they not only do they help us understand what we're reading, but by paying attention to them, they can also help us more clearly identify the central idea of the text. Another thing that we can use to help us understand an informational text better is to look at the structure of the text. And we're not going to dwell too much on this right now because we're going to look at it more when we start writing our own narratives and as we're reading pieces. But basically, the text structure is how the information has been organized so that a reader can easily follow and understand what's being talked about. There are 6 main ways to organize informational text. There's other ways besides these, but these are the ones that I really want you guys to understand. And like I said, we're not going to talk about them too much right now. We'll explore them more further. But sequential or chronological order, where we're describing events that have actually happened in the order that they happened. Cause and effect, where we look at how one thing has caused other things to happen. Problem and solution, where we're looking at one problem and thinking about or coming up with or identifying solutions to that problem. Comparing or contrasting, looking for similarities and differences. Description or explanation, where you just describe what you're talking about or what you want somebody to learn about. An argument, where you make an argument about something using details and facts. So again, we're going to go more into these guys later, but I just want you to be aware that by understanding text structure and how ideas have been organized in a text, you can have a better understanding of what you're reading. So informational text can be made up of a mixture of facts and opinions. You need to be mindful of that while you're reading so that you keep an eye out for what is actually fact and what is the opinion of the author. So, to be clear, a fact is anything that can be proven as true or false by using reliable sources. Reliable means trustworthy. Okay, so here are some examples of reliable resources that you could use to make sure that a fact is actually true. You could go to a scholarly website, such as a website that's ending in .edu or .gov. EDU addresses tend to be ones created by universities or schools. So some kind of expert has been involved in creating whatever informational stuff you're trying to look at. You can also use a .gov website, that's for government, but also keep in mind that government websites can be influenced by whichever political party is in power at the time. Another good resource that you could use to find reliable information would be a peer-reviewed academic journal. Basically, those are like magazines where people only get published in them. Their studies will only be published if other experts in their field have gone through the study and verified that things that are published there are in fact true. So those ones are really reliable because you don't get published unless other experts have thrown in their opinions on your work. And then finally, there's actually more resources, but the last example I'm going to give you today would be a news source that has very minimal bias. And you could think of like PBS or NPR as being good news sources in that respect. Those two, PBS and NPR, only operate as with basically viewer and listener contributions. They're not being paid by any big advertising companies or anything like that. So they're not getting money from Coke to give you a story. They're just trying to give you the straight facts without any additional opinion or bias. And just so you guys understand what bias is when the author has a preference for one group over another. And everybody has a bias. Everybody has their preferences for certain things, right? We just have to be mindful of that when we're reading an informational text so that we kind of gauge what it is that the author's trying to do with their informational text, especially if they're trying to persuade us to do something. By understanding their bias, we can understand where they're coming from, and we can kind of gauge whether or not we want to go where they want to go in their argument or with the information they're providing us. So we can be biased in a lot of different ways. Right now we see a lot of political bias in our news sources. That just means there's a lot of resources out there that are catering to people who are for one party over the other. There can be racial bias in a text. There can be religious bias in a text. There can be all kinds of biases. It's just a preference for one thing over another, one group over another. So we have to be mindful of bias to make sure that we aren't being manipulated in some way. In contrast to facts, which remember can be proven true by a reliable resource, we have opinions. And opinion is basically whatever someone thinks, feels, or believes. So here's the thing. Just because someone thinks something, feels something, or believes something doesn't mean that they're right or that their opinion is true and that nobody can argue it. So we need to watch out for the opinions that show up in a text, because those opinions can reveal the author's bias. And even your textbook has bias. So keep that in mind. When people are revealing their opinions about something, they're revealing their preference for something over something else, right? So that inherently biases what they're writing. Our job is to make sure that we pay attention to the facts and that we look at the opinions and decide for ourselves if the opinions have any merit. Another element that we have to consider when we're reading an informational piece is the author's purpose. And that just basically means, why is the author writing what they're writing? What's their reason for writing their piece? And there are three main reasons that we usually say somebody's writing something. And we can remember those using the acronym PI. An author might write a piece in order to persuade you about something. They want to convince you to believe what they believe or to feel what they believe. The next one is inform. That's what the I in PI stands for. If somebody is informing you about something, they want to teach you about that thing. And the last main type of author's purpose that we have is to entertain. That's the E there. Either they want you to think the same way they think, they want to teach you about something new, or they just want to bring some kind of joy to your life. So, although some nonfiction pieces can have a theme, like if it's a part of the genre called literary nonfiction, most don't really have a theme. They're just trying to give you information. And so one of the key elements of a nonfiction or an informational text is its central idea. And remember, a central idea is just a one-sentence summary of the text. You guys probably heard it referred to as a main idea when you were in elementary school. It's the same thing. Central idea and main idea are the same. So the central idea of any text is supported with something we call supporting details. And basically, those are details that can answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. Sometimes you'll see a question that will say, how does the author develop the central idea of the story? Basically, they're just asking you, which supporting details do you see that back up the central idea that you've identified? The last element of a nonfiction text that we'll talk about is sequence of events, and we already have experience with this one as well because we use it in fiction stories too. We used it when we were developing our narratives. It's just the order in which events in a text happen or happened. So if you're reading a news article, it's important to keep track of what happened when and how one event might have led to another. So you can do that by kind of making a timeline for yourself in your head of those events. And that will help you as the reader better track and understand what's going on. All right, so now that you've completed the notes, you need to go back through them and add questions about the material. Okay, so for example, you could just put in the question column here, what is an opinion? Okay, I'm not looking for too much. I just want you to develop questions that will help you prepare for a test. And then for your summary, your job is to answer the essential question in about 3 to 5 sentences. If you run out of things to say before you get to 3 to 5 sentences, then you can explain what you've learned as well. Okay? So go ahead and take care of your questions and the summary, and be ready for something kind of fun tomorrow. Bye, guys.